Hi CISD parents of identified GT elementary learners. My name is Dina Dinas. I'm the Executive Director of Teaching and Learning, and advanced academics falls into my realm of responsibilities. I've been in the district for 20 years, and I have done everything from teach third grade on one of our elementary campuses to be an elementary principal, to working at both of our high schools. And now it's my privilege to support advanced academics across the district, and that includes our elementary GT specialists. We have one assigned to each campus, and they are really the boots on the ground that make our GT services work. As you go through this presentation, I hope you have an understanding of who our specialists are, what our service model looks like, and if you have any questions, you'll know who to contact about that. Here's the 2019-2020 GT specialist team across the district by campus. And while we have had amazing GT specialists over the last 8 years where I've been in this position, and certainly before that as I was a campus educator, I can honestly say we have assembled an amazing team, and they are very committed to meeting the needs of each of our learners. I am pretty proud to work with these ladies. So as you review the information on our GTI instructional model, we're going to talk about it through two lenses. The first is extension, where we extend on the curriculum that's being taught in the 4 core content areas in every classroom. And then we'll talk about enrichment, which is where we really help learners plug into their passions and try to tailor some instruction and or some experiences that meet their particular learning interests and needs. We're also going to talk a little bit about social-emotional support. Growing up gifted is not an easy thing to do. And then very briefly, I will review some information from the new state plan for gifted education and the change in funding for gifted services across the state. I hope at this point you have heard the words Professional Learning Community, or PLC. That is who we are as a school district. As we sit down in our classrooms and on our campuses to design quality instruction for our learners, we are asking ourselves 4 questions. The first is, what do we want our learners to know? Obviously, that addresses the standards, and not just the Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills, or TEKS, but there are other standards that we have added to our curriculum, things like global competencies and technology standards. So we're asking ourselves as we sit down to design, what is it that we want our learners to know at the end of this instructional unit, at the end of this day, at the end of this semester. The second question we ask is, how are we going to know if they've learned it? So this is about how we choose to assess that level of mastery. The third question is, how will we respond if they don't learn it? So this is where we would provide intervention for learners who are struggling to master a concept. And then question 4 is, how will we respond if they already know it? So in Coppell ISD, in relation to curriculum and our GT specialists at the elementary level, we really work in these 3 components of a professional learning community. We provide support in these 3. In the district, we have identified what we call HPLS, which is High Priority Learning Standards. I don't know if this is common knowledge, but if we spent the exact same amount of time on all the standards that currently exist in the state's curriculum, then our learners would be in school for 21 years. We don't have that kind of time. And so we have identified standards that we believe are the high priority learning standards. In other words, these are the ones that we want to spend maximum time on because they provide us with leverage. They are relevant beyond this grade level. They may be a prerequisite skill for the learner. to be successful at the next grade level. And these are the kinds of things that we want our learners to know, not just this year, but several years, maybe for the rest of their lives. So those are the standards that we commit to as a district, making sure that all of our learners have mastery of. This also provides a foundation for what we would call a guaranteed and viable curriculum, which just means that if you're at Cottonwood Creek or you're at Mockingbird or you're at Wilson or Town Center, you're going to get the exact same standards no matter what classroom you are in, no matter what building you're in across the district. So that's guaranteed and viable. So we take those HPLS or those high priority standards, and as GT specialists, we work with our classroom educators on, well, how can we design an assessment that does two things? One, it will let us know that we've done a good job instructing the standards, but could we also provide a pre-assessment that would let us know whether the learners knew that information before we started the instruction or not? If they did, can we take that pre-assessment information and then provide extension for the learners that know that information? So this is kind of our process and how we collaborate with classroom educators in order to get to the most important standards and to provide some extension with our general education learners. The next slide will provide even more information on that. So extension can be provided in the classroom in a number of ways. The first is with the GT specialist collaborating with grade level educators to make sure that planning is intentional around extension. What kind of lessons or mini lessons are available as part of the current lesson being taught for learners who have shown mastery of the content. That would be the first way. So that's really where the specialist is supporting the classroom educator in design. Classroom differentiation may be where the classroom educator has requested the GT specialist design some differentiated activities that ask learners to use a different process to come at the curriculum because they already understand the way it's being taught in the classroom. It could be that GT learners are asked to have a different product that's more sophisticated because of their understanding of the content. Or it could be that the curriculum itself has been changed or extended based on the learner's needs, and so the content itself is actually different. That's what classroom differentiation could look like. And then the third level of support is push-in and pull-out. So push-in may be where the classroom educator and the GT specialist are actually co-teaching around a concept, or the classroom educator has asked the GT specialist to come in and pull a small group that's really working on more sophisticated process, product, or content. And then the final way that we would support our GT learners would be pull-out support, where we are actually removing them from the general education classroom because whatever activity we have designed for them around those high priority learning standards is not able to be done in the regular classroom. But I want to be sure that I point out that all of this is based on the learner's needs. So it ebbs and flows. We know that many of us have particular gifts in one area or another, but don't have them in every area. And so the GT specialist is constantly monitoring and adjusting what level of support learners need. And I guess likewise, you don't have to be identified GT to receive some of these extensions and supports, because it would make sense that any learner who has mastery of the content be provided the opportunity to learn something new today. Learners in 3rd through 5th grade will have a customized learning plan. This is where the GT specialist has spent some time getting to know the learners' interests and passions, and have asked them to do some goal setting around their academic goals. What do they want to learn more about? Usually related to grade level content, but not always. And then maybe having a personal goal where they may set a behavior goal. For example, I want to get more organized, or I want to find a way to pace myself so that I'm not constantly procrastinating. Those are some things that they might do. And we want to provide them with the opportunity to be reflective on how they learn best and what challenges they face in their daily learning lives. The other thing that we will do for fifth graders is to provide some support as they transition to middle school. Most fifth graders across the district will be assessed as, even if they are already identified, so that we can have an idea of what courses would be the best for them to sign up for when they are transitioning to their secondary educational careers. If we have identified a learner early, say in kindergarten, first or second grade, chances are we identified them general intellectual ability, or GIA, because an area of strength, an area of intense passion, probably has not developed yet. But by the time learners get to fifth grade, we are able to see, as they've hit that third grade mark where they start to think in a very abstract way, they're no longer living in a black and white world, but they are certainly able to discuss and really be conflicted by a lot of the shades of gray that live in our world. We start to see that learners develop an area of strength. So it could be that they are language arts and social studies oriented, or it could be that they're math science oriented. We do have people who are general intellectual ability in everything, but that eligibility, if you will, doesn't appear as much in the intermediate grades. We usually see that at the elementary grades. So depending on how a learner assesses in fifth grade, that will determine what courses they can take. So we will look at, if a learner is identified language arts, social studies, those are the 2 GT classes they can take as they go to middle school. If they are identified math science, they can take those 2 classes at the middle school level. And if they are identified general intellectual ability at the end of fifth grade, then they can register for all 4 GT classes should they choose to do that. Enrichment is that wonderful opportunity for us to figure out, well, what is a learner interested in and how can we provide that? I have given some examples on this slide, but it's certainly not comprehensive. It was just a place to start. When we had our presentation nights, the gifted specialists from each campus did talk about what they do specifically on their campuses, and I would encourage you, if you have any questions, to reach out to them. But I want to say that all of this is really predicated on time that is built into each of our schedules at each of the campuses, whether they call it win time or shine time or something like that. There is time built in on every campus for what I need. And that can be a time where, if you go back to those 4 PLC questions that we started with, that you can provide some intervention for learners who are struggling. It's also where we could provide some extension, but it's also where we could provide some enrichment for our learners who have mastered the content and need us to really engage with them on their areas of passion. So some things that are offered across the district, but again, this is not a comprehensive list, are HOE, that's hands-on equations. It's an algebraic thinking program that allows us to work with learners as young as second grade, but by third grade, that's where we see that some of them take a real interest in mathematics, and we can provide some support through HOE. Many of our campuses have robotics. Obviously, that computational thinking and that logical thinking have been manifesting themselves across the district in all pockets, but we do have the opportunity to really work with some of our learners and their intense passion for coding, programming, and robotics. We have really what essentially is a Junior United Nations, and 2 of our campuses really participate in that, and they have the opportunity to make a case for things that they feel like need to be addressed, and they attend conferences and conventions with other United Nations groups from across the Metroplex and across the state. It's a pretty fun activity, and certainly learners who are more language arts, social studies bent have enjoyed participating in that. Our GT specialist last year wrote a grant through the Coppell Education Foundation and received Rubik's Cubes. And while Rubik's Cubes are a challenge in themselves, what's even more challenging is creating mosaics out of multiple cubes. So each campus has 100, and you may have seen while you were visiting the campus that they have challenged themselves to create mosaics of the Mona Lisa and of Starry Night, etc. And that has been a great extension activity for all of our campuses. We're excited about that. Genius Hour is a time on some of our campuses where learners can really pursue something that is of interest to them. And it could be anything from knitting to writing a book to creating a invention that they want to share with others and prototyping that, etc. But Genius Hour is really their time to explore an area of intense passion, and that may be facilitated by an adult, and then again it may not be. So that's kind of a difference between Win Time and Genius Hour. Creative writing is an opportunity that we have at all of our campuses, and the Coppell Gifted Association hosts a writing competition for creative writers every year, and that information will be coming out soon, so we're excited about that. And then the Texas Performance Standards projects are extensions, TPSP, are extensions from the state curriculum that have been provided to us. Some of them are very appropriate and very exciting, and so if a campus has a group of learners that really wants to take a deep dive into TPSP, that's a time where we could do that when we're providing enrichment. Again, if you want to know more about the specific opportunities that are available on your campus, please reach out to your GT educator or go to their websites. Growing up gifted can be hard, and one of the other supports that our GT specialists provide for our GT learners is around social-emotional learning. Parents, I would ask you to reflect on the learner or learners that you live with and whether some of them exhibit procrastination or have kind of imposter syndrome. In other words, they're just paralyzed because they think that they have to know everything, and because they don't know everything, they must not really be gifted. If you have a learner who has intense emotion about things and gets very upset or is extremely sensitive, those are all characteristics of gifted learners as a whole. And as we think about providing support for them, we really look at kind of individualizing what that might look like. If a learner needs an adult to talk to, perhaps they are struggling with something that they understand that their peers don't understand. An example of that might be conflict in part of the world where the United States may end up taking military action, and the learner's understanding of the human cost of that, the economic cost of that, etc. And while you may be, snickering a little bit, thinking that elementary learners don't think about those kinds of things, a lot of our gifted learners do, and they have a sophisticated understanding of the events of the world around them, and yet they only have the control of a 7 or 8-year-old in terms of the decisions that they can make. And sometimes they just need an adult to talk to, and so we work to provide some support in that way. That may be a one-on-one conversation with the gifted specialist, or if it's something that we're noticing is a pattern across a grade level or in one class in particular, we may ask our campus counselors to come in and provide a mini lesson or a group lesson on compassion and choice, and kind of reflecting on what is in your control and what isn't in your control, and helping learners channel their concerns and even fears in a productive way. Something else that we have noticed with our GT learners is over the last couple of years as we've been looking at our threat assessment data. So let me back out of that for just a second and say that parents, we have a process in our school district where if a learner is a threat to themselves, they are a threat to others, or they are a threat to property, we document that and provide supports for those learners. I also will say to you, if that has happened with your learner, you already know it. You are part of the conversation. But as we were looking at summative data, not this last year, we haven't finished going through that yet, but the year before, from 17-18, what we noticed was 20% of the threat assessments across the school district were learners who were identified GT. These are learners who are in some ways in a pressure cooker all the time, and they're very hard on themselves and unforgiving. They're perfectionists, and so we need to provide some support for them, which leads nicely into redefining success. We've been doing some work as a district around helping everyone in our entire community, educators, parents, and learners alike, to understand that there's more than one pathway to success, and that learners are certainly something more than their GPA, what courses they take, and whatever label, if you will, has been provided to them through an identification process across the district. And so we are working on really taking some action around redefining success, and that goes back to some of that goal setting that we want learners to have. Yes, there should be a struggle, because without struggle, there is no success, but everything shouldn't be a struggle, and perfection is not a goal. So we're working on that across the district, and I'm excited about that work. In terms of thinking about how to help learners self-manage, there is a theory around overexcitabilities that some of us have a great deal of physical energy, and while that's not a bad thing, when you are in a classroom environment that doesn't sometimes meet the needs of our physical learners, how do we help them learn to fidget and manage that energy? Those that have a lot of central energy, so that's where you take in a lot of input, but sometimes struggle when you're overstimulated. How do we help with that? Those that have lots of creative and imaginational energy, these are wonderful, but sometimes it can go to a dark place. And so how do we help them keep that energy in a positive way, their creative skills in a positive way? Those that are intellectual, and they are just interested in everything, that's such an exciting thing, but it can also be exhausting and overwhelming. And so how do we provide support for those learners and help them really go through a decision-making process about what am I going to pursue at this time? And then those that have a lot of emotional energy, we have some very sensitive souls out there, and we need to help them regulate that intensity that they feel around everything. And so this is some of the social emotional support that we provide for our gifted learners. As I've referenced a couple of times, there is a state plan for the education of gifted and talented learners. The first draft of the new plan came out in November of 2018. There was a subsequent draft in the spring of this year, and then in June we received another draft of the state plan. I'm hoping that we're pretty close to finalizing that document and having it be really the guiding force that it's intended to be for instruction of gifted learners across the state. There's a link to that on the CISD GT website. If you are interested in that, just go to the district website and click on curriculum and instruction, and then on GT. But some changes that have been made in the last legislative session reflected funding for gifted education. So I want to be really clear about where we are in our district in terms of the funds that we are receiving for our GT learners. At this point, a rough estimate of the allotment for GT in Coppell ISD is $460,000. A lot of that will go to salaries, and it requires us to do a couple of things in order to make sure that we receive those funds. We'll need to complete some coding of our campuses in terms of the way they provide gifted services. I'm attending a couple of webinars later this month and into October to get some more clarity on what that will look like, as our service model is a little more dynamic than the choices that have initially been put forth by the state. The district will need to create and adopt a policy in regards to the use of GT funds. I can tell you that the subtext of that policy, no matter what kind of fancy words go in it, will be that we use GT funds to support GT services. And then we will have to certify that we're in compliance with the state plan for the education of gifted and talented students. I'm seeking guidance on what that compliance will look like and what kind of documentation will be necessary. The state has not yet released that, but I want to assure you that the Coppell Independent School District is committed to providing these services for our gifted learners, and that we will continue to have a service model that best meets their needs. I know this was a great deal of information, and I appreciate your patience. If you have any questions, please feel free to address them to me, ddinus@coppellisd.com. And I would also encourage you to follow your campus gifted specialists on Twitter. They are frequently tweeting out what is happening in terms of enrichment and extension on the campuses. And it's a great way to just follow along, and it gives you some talking points around the kitchen table at night about, well, what happened in school today? If you have any questions, again, please address them to me or your campus GT specialist. We are excited about the 2019-2020 school year, and we look forward to working closely with you. Thank you.